This is a wonderful room. Okay, let's start. Good morning, my name is Jouwe. Welcome to the Roadmap to Equality in the Arts. It's we have a full program and there's lots to do. And Delphine, come to get a mic and join the conversation because so we're talking about overrepresentation, underrepresentation, misrepresentation in the arts, and categories of difference that are part of that situation. Let's go to the front a little bit. Let's not be afraid of these people because they're all beautiful. And Delphine, you're one of the initiators, pushers for this. Why is this important? Tell us.
There are so many reasons. First, I would
interesting that you're taking a step back again. Like,
So maybe just a few words about how this project came together to show the urgency. Exactly a year ago, I was invited to give a kick-off lecture for the program School of Missing Men by Annick, who's sitting here. And Kathleen was in the audience and she said, we should meet again and continue this conversation afterwards. So we met a month later. Kathleen, Annick, else was asked to join the conversation and myself. We didn't know each other. And through the conversation came, we should do a conference on gender inequality in the arts. And here we are a year later doing this conversation. So we started to work together. We all felt the sense of urgency. What's the urgency? I could give you a few words. For instance, in the arts, gender pay gap, 27%, pension gap, 50%. If you analyze collections, there is currently no overview of what's the situation in terms of gender. It has never been made. We don't know. Some newspaper took the initiative in the recent years, like False Ground or Metropolitan, to do a yearly survey. The numbers, as you saw, maybe in this article, show they are between 0% to at the most 45% in Heus Marseille, but on average rather like 4-10%. So these issues are a blind spot, they are not addressed. As well, we can expand if we look at the economical situation, parental leave. So as we know, for men it's 2 to 3 days. So it's based on childcare is based on economical income, so it's putting a lot of pressure on the woman's career. And I see it around me, and so we have many and complex issues. They are structural, they are pervasive, they are systemic, and we need change. And another very important issue is sexual harassment, racism, discrimination, various forms of discrimination that are also not addressed within the institutions, and by institution I mean of any kind, art institution like art schools or museum and so on. So we need to implement really structural organization and possibility for people who have experience of discrimination, of harassment, to be able to anonymously or openly report it, being heard, and that measured investigation, support, and eventually sanctions are taken. So this is some of the some organization that we will have some people we are going to talk today about this. So these are some of the things. So there are so many issues that we had to focus for today. So we chose 4 core elements: data and quota, art education, as I said, harassment and discrimination, and models for change.
Yeah, the last bit is, I think, in a way the most important, because that's something maybe not that good at yet. In the Netherlands, we try, and it seems to not become sustainable, right? But before we go off track right away, I just want you to pinpoint the initiators, just so for people in the room.
Raise, stand up or maybe show it. Elle, Kathleen, Annick,
yeah,
Roselle,
yeah.
and the technical team, Luc is filming, Victor is doing the sound and the light, and the podcast, it will be filmed and recorded, so you can also share and view it later. Another element of the conversation today was to be actually intersectional, to question also gender, understanding of gender today. So we have different speakers. Unfortunately, Naomi Peter had to cancel this morning due to family circumstances, but she sent a text and a presentation, so she will still be with us in some ways, which was very important for today.
What's the most important thing you want us to take away when we leave this room today?
What we would like is that it's a collective effort. It's all of us, and I'm glad to see there are also many men in the room, because I did a conference last year where there were only women, and I thought that's barely believable in 2019. So, you know, share the knowledge that you have, share your experiences. What we would really like today is, through the conversation model for change, at the end of the day, that some concrete proposition come up that we could follow up with. We have a work group. Those who are interested are absolutely welcome to join the work group, yeah, expand the conversation.
Yeah, so it doesn't stop here. It doesn't stop today. It would be wonderful if the conversation continues also in different parts of the country, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Last thing, you've been very, let's say, inspired by France in this case. Why?
We were looking in Europe and beyond Europe, what were models, or where every country was standing in terms of gender equality in the arts. And France has developed what is called, they call Equality Roadmap 2022, which is a whole series of measures and observatory for data analysis and transforming this data into policies. And we thought that was a really interesting example to look at, to see what's the impact when such policies are actually in place. So, but we have also, we wanted to have today initiative of different scales. So we have Agnès Sall on the phone, who implemented the French Roadmap for Equality. So we picked one model out of many we could choose from. And also a very important point, we mostly invited people working in the Netherlands and the nearby country, because it is absolutely urgent that we have this conversation here and that we come together here. So this was really an essential point of the guest we invited for today. And thank you for moderating the day and doing the keynote, and I feel really honored today.
Thank you. Yeah, let's get going then,
yeah,
because we have a lot to do. Thank you so much. Delphine, give her a big hand.
Nancy, it's yours.
Thank you. Okay, so who am I? My name is Nancy Jouwe, and I'm a researcher, lecturer, and public speaker, I guess, and a background in gender studies and cultural history from the University of Utrecht, and having worked in the cultural sector from, I guess, 1997 onwards in different roles, as I went along, this topic has been always very important to me. From different angles, I've been, for instance, I've been the deputy director of Mama Cash, which is a fund for women, and was also managing the Culture Fund, which actually financially supported women artists. For a long time, we had art prizes for women, and if you look back at it now, that was an enormous push for their careers, you could say. And the slogan, the tagline of Mama Cash was, you know, women with ideals need money. And I think that's still very, very true, right? I've been working in the arts world, one of the co-founders of Framer Framed, which is an art space in Amsterdam. Now the proud chair of BAC in Utrecht, but also teaching at different art schools. Having been a teacher at Willem de Koning and at Sandberg, and now teaching at the Master of Fine Arts at the HKU. And I can tell you the stuff that we hear today from different people I've also heard at those other places. So I think there's a lot of work to do. So I really also want to commend the initiators for pushing this conversation, which is so needed and which has not been held that much in the Netherlands. And yes, we are going to talk about the Netherlands mostly. So I've been asked to give a sort of keynote, and I was thinking, geez, what am I going to talk about? There's so much to say. So I figured, because most of it will be very practice-based, what we're going to talk about, I thought I start out with how I understand intersectionality and tie that in with some hindrances along the way that I've experienced using some personal views, personal experiences also, and some accelerators, and leave it at that and hope for the rest of us. And then we'll have a short Q&A if you want to, and have a quick break. So that's how it's gonna look like. So part one, intersectionality. Difficult word. It's an academic term these days, and sometimes people say it's too academic, but really it was very much a term from the grassroots before it became an academic term. Especially women of color who were pushing for women's rights already were busy doing intersectionality, you could say. And intersectional feminists usually refer to her, Sojourner Truth, as the ultimate foremother of intersectional thinking and doing. Why? Because she held a speech she was born and raised in Dutch New York. She spoke Dutch until she was 9. Why? Because her owner was Dutch. She was an enslaved girl. And then was bought and sold to another owner, where she then had to speak English. Was beaten severely because she didn't speak proper English, because she was versed in Dutch. But then as a grown-up and as a free woman, started to become a public speaker, both speaking on women's rights and the issue of race, obviously stemming from all her personal experiences. And the speech that she held in Akron, Ohio in 1851 is now known as the speech Ain't I a Woman, where she gives all these little examples of how she is being treated or being seen in a position that she's not considered a woman or not a respectable woman, but she still is. And so to reiterate this notion of her being in this crossroads of positions is what has been so inspiring for intersectional feminists. It was coined academically by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. She was, by the way, she was here in the Netherlands. There's still some seats here in the front also, if you want to grab it, be my guest. So she was in the Netherlands. She's a law professor and so it was as an academic discipline, it was first sort of used also in law, but then after that also in gender studies and sociology. What it really is it's a tool. Intersectionality you can see as a tool to understand the crossroads of categories of difference and
where gender, race, ethnicity, class, and sexuality and other axes of difference then co-construct, meet each other and co-construct and work simultaneously. So it's different from diversity, where things are topped above one another. Intersectionality is really about, well, when you intersect with all those different categories of difference, you then sort of inhabit a specific position, which is, by the way, not a static position, which then can also have you be in a specific situation of discrimination or privilege because of it, right? And that's important to note. So 2 things, not just an academic term and different from diversity. It's been a tool, so a concept, a theoretical concept, if you will, a tool that works as an analysis for emancipation and against oppression, looking both at positive and negative processes. And so obviously Kimberly Crenshaw, as a law professor, looked at lots of cases of discrimination. Now, how does this work in practice? I'll give you 3 examples. One is, oh, and by the way, intersectionality in the Netherlands was introduced through this publication in 2001, now almost 20 years ago, which is an overview of 25 years at that time, so we're reaching 40 years, I guess, of a black migrant and refugee women's movement in the Netherlands, which was co-edited by Gloria Wecker, Maaike Botman, and myself. Example 1, exhibit 1, you could say, right? An example from a law perspective. Meet Ezra Çuskun. She's a young Dutch-Turkish woman who got hit by a motorist, thus being severely disabled. So it was a traffic accident. She was a teenager at the time, and so basically, yeah, she is not able to function autonomously anymore. So what was interesting in the court case that then came is that the Dutch judge awarded her only with almost 13% of what would be considered a normal amount for insurance money to be given to her. So 70,000 euros rather than 550,000 euros. And during the court case, the judge basically said, why was this ruling, you may ask? Well, the judge figured that since she was now not useful anymore for the workforce, and probably having had children already in her 20s, you know, the amount that in a way she wasn't worthy enough to have this full amount, you could say. Now, if Ezra had been Mohammed Çuskun, so if he had been a Turkish male disabled person, the ruling would have been different because of him not being, you know, the one who's getting the babies. But also if it was Anita Janssen rather than Ezra Çuskun, again, the ruling would have been different because usually white Dutch women are seen as people who get babies quite late in the game. So the fact that she was both a woman, young and Turkish, so her intersectional position specifically gave this ruling, which was weird because if you look in the same period of time, the Central Bureau for Statistics actually came out with a report saying that it's actually migrant women who work more often full-time in the Netherlands than, say, autochthonous white women. So the actual facts and the statistics, and we'll hear more about statistics and why statistics are so important, said something else than how the judge was ruling. So the judge was also being informed by what you could say stereotypical notions. Exhibit number 2, an example from the arts. The the PC Hooft Prize is the most important literary prize. It was awarded 3 years ago to Astrid Roemer, 4 years ago. who is considered the most famous Dutch Surinamese writer. I think it was the first time that a woman of color was awarded this prize. And although the newspapers, especially the leading newspapers, weren't that negative, they were actually quite positive. One of the most sought after radio shows on Radio 1 in the Netherlands, so public service, discussed her winning this award as something that was really weird. So literary critic number 1 said, well, this is literally them talking about, they're having this conversation on the radio. Well, it's politics. They want to give attention to Suriname, the Caribbean, literature across borders. They have made a political decision because who actually lives there and can write? Literary critic number 2. It feels like an ideological choice, politically correct thinking. You're like, no, but they actually had this conversation. It sounds weird in English, eh? More like, oh my God, which is also interesting. I probably don't have to explain to you why this is a problem. Now, example number 3, and we will talk more about this this afternoon, also about harassment and being in the public eye and being of a specific intersectional position. Only so a year ago, 2 columnists, women of color, Clarice Cargard and Saada Noorhusen, both spoke out against the fact that they were discriminated against heavily because they were basically unapologetic columnists, speaking about the issues that they felt strongly about and having no qualms about it, just saying it like it is. And that apparently is a crime to a lot of people because they were heavily, heavily attacked. Hundreds of racist attacks online and offline, up to death threats. Many, many, many of them. They did different things. They made different choices. So Saada basically thought, well, F that. I'm going to stop doing that column. And I'm going to be chief editor of One World. I'm fine. I don't need you guys. Forget it. And Clarice, and both of them went obviously also to the police. And so the newspapers were also trying to figure out, well, what is it about this situation? Where they also asked me to sort of weigh in on that conversation. But the thing is also that Saada said, well, why am I stopping? Not just because it's the racist attacks, that's one thing, but my peers, my colleagues are not having my back. So they love for me to do this edgy stuff, to write these columns, because then, you know, people have clicks on social media, people will read the newspaper online more and more, but they weren't, you know, having her back, so not defending her because she was doing this, and that's not on. So loyalty towards one another and creating a safe space for people who are more vulnerable in that respect is then very important. And that's a hindrance, of course, if your colleagues don't have your back. Let's talk some more about the second part of my talk, hindrances. This is a quote literally from, a lot of you probably don't know, but some of you do, because we have, 3 generations here in the room. I still remember it. But we used to have a minister of emancipation. Yeah, no, really. 17 years ago, he closed the door. Well, it was a white heterosexual male, as you do in the Netherlands, right? If you talk about emancipation from a Christian political party, CDA. Minister De Geus was his name. And he, in his talk, literally said, "Yeah, we're basically done, people. We're happy, and so yeah, let's close the door." This was the mood at the time, right? Also, what it meant was basically no money anymore for initiatives around, types of emancipation, and it really impacted society at large, you could say. At that time, so this is the first decade of this millennium. Basically, if I talk to young people in their 20s, and would use the F word, feminism, for instance, they would look at me like, ooh, they were very annoyed by it. So feminism was totally out, you could say. That was sort of the dominant discourse in society, and it even went through to, at that time, I was working at Mama Cash. This is a March 8th event that we were having in 2000 or 2001. And so there were a lot of young women of color and older women of color who were doing amazing stuff, really cool things. Oh, okay. And still, the conversation wasn't... the thing is a little bit sensitive. It's a sensitive topic, so even the computer is like, oh my God, sensitive. And the mood had really changed. So, even Mama Cash staff and board was sort of trapped in what I would consider two myths: that the Netherlands had successfully fulfilled its emancipation purpose, one, and secondly, that art is a luxury. So, let's not do that anymore. And so, unfortunately, that program then was sort of shut down, and I was really a minority within that constellation. And so that's been a thing. It's a pity that, anyway, doesn't matter. So, second hindrance, the quality versus diversity argument. This is something we hear a lot, right? I saw this tweet only the other day. I picked it off of Twitter 2 days ago. It's Stephen King. We all know Stephen King, right? He's this enormously successful writer, Carrie, Thriller. All his books have been filmed almost, basically. So he has an enormous voice. And this is what he says. I would never consider diversity in matters of art, only quality. It seems to me that to do otherwise would be wrong. Well, we have a problem there, I think. And while the counting, the data analysis and the counting that was done, and we'll hear about that later on, and that came into the news, again, a journalist asking, so why is counting so important? And it's here in my quote, basically it's in Dutch. I say, well, quality, if you look at quality, and people say, well, we'll only look at quality. Quality is a cop-out. It's to not consider the enormous disbalance, the underrepresentation that goes on. Why is there then such a disbalance, right? As if black women or men or women in general cannot deliver quality. Because if we really would talk about, consider quality, what do we mean by it, first of all? What are the indicators to think about this is quality, right? So really quality is a cop-out, to not engage with notions of diversity or intersectionality. Now another thing, and this is something that obviously has been a thing the last sort of 5 years in the Netherlands, we have started talking about race. And I give lectures about that. I have a class, a whole lecture series on race in the Netherlands, but I do some public speaking on it as well. And what I usually start with is saying, well, let's start with being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because this is a difficult, sensitive, fragile topic. People get annoyed, upset, or feel attacked or feel guilty. There's a lot of emotion around it. But why is it that we find race such a difficult thing? Well, there's a lot of stuff, and I cannot tackle everything, But one thing I would like to remind us collectively is that because of World War II, especially here in the Netherlands, because of World War II, we basically decided not to do race anymore. It had become taboo, obviously because we realized that our neighbors, because of race, had killed off millions of people. And we're like, well, let's not do that again. So both in sort of academia, but also in sort of public discourse, it became a taboo. Didn't mean, though, that it vanished, but we started using ethnicity much more as an idea of difference. We also saw tolerance as very much a Dutch quality. It has, of course, historical roots. Religious tolerance was something that especially Amsterdam prided itself for, because yes, Jewish people from Southern Europe or the Huguenots from France all went to the Republic of the Netherlands in the early modern ages, where they weren't persecuted. So this is sort of a common idea that we collectively have, and we feel comfortable with that position. And if you don't do race, and people start saying to you, but you're racist because then we're having a very difficult conversation. One of those conversations and how that sort of works out for me personally was here in the Museum of Arnhem, which is, I guess, down the road, right? I was invited to do sort of an opening speech for Esseri Erhirien Essi. She's a visual artist. Check her out. She's a award-winning visual artist, and I think she's the first woman of color that actually got her own show in the Netherlands. This is 6 years ago, and I was asked to talk about notions, well, basically to introduce her work and sort of contextualize it a little bit. So obviously I used the R word, I talked about race, and then this woman comes up to me after and says, "Oh, but how is it that you speak Dutch so well? It's amazing." And obviously that's considered a compliment, but it's not, I can tell you. It's actually, you know, well, I'm like saying like, well, you know, I've born and raised here. I went to Dutch schools. I actually have a university degree. So one would think that, you know, I can speak Dutch. But then this woman was better informed because she knows I'm partly Papuan. And so she was kind of confused that me being a Papuan also could speak, you know, perfectly Dutch. It just didn't click in her head. And so both of us had to do different work after that. Me being obviously very annoyed by it, but also realizing the world, the bubble that she was living in. But these are typical things that still happen. How am I doing for time? Still well. Okay, not too bad. And this also reminds us that even if, you know, a museum as a contact zone, a place where people can come together, enjoy art, and have a conversation about it, can also still be violent places. And so we have to be aware of that fact that also, even if there's a great curator, they are doing wonderful work, but if the infrastructure of that place doesn't adhere to those principles, values of being a racist-free, sexist-free space for everyone, then it becomes difficult. The other thing which was funny about this whole thing 6 years ago here at Museum Arnhem was that Esseri and I didn't know each other, but we saw each other and started hysterically laughing. It was almost performative. It was like, oh my God, ah. Why? Because we realized we were the only two people of color in the room. It was this classic white space, this classic white situation where us who had to do the performance, had to, you know, educate the people sort of on different levels. Her with her beautiful art, and so it was this little moment of realizing what it is we were doing there. So, another thing that's, I guess, a hindrance is this notion of the canon. Especially in the arts, we are so deeply sort of, it's so important somehow. The canon, which is also an autonomous thing, so don't touch it. And then within that canon, it's the genius that nestles there. The genius is so important. But that genius is always a white guy, right? And sometimes, okay, maybe a guy of color, but for a woman, it's very difficult, or a non-binary person for that matter, it's very difficult to inhabit the position of the genius. And I'm sure we'll come back to that, but I think it's very important to note it. Okay, I'm coming to my third part, which is accelerators. One accelerating aspect is, I think, yes, let's talk some more about that canon. This is, so I sort of convened a series of talks, a series of gatherings under the heading Black Netherlands in 2015, 16, and 17, mostly in Leiden and Amsterdam. Where we had a discussion in the arts also about and portraiture, and many different things came by. One talk was also about the role of black feminism here, a talk with 3 feminists, and it was Cristel Munguende, the youngest panelist, who also said, well, it's really important to have your work also be accessible. Your canon, a lot of this canon is very invisible, and a lot of that work has been hugely important. How can we make that more accessible? I think that's something that we should really work on. Secondly, I want to briefly touch upon the work of Iris. Who doesn't know Iris Kensmil? See, there's still some people. Well, you should know her because she's awesome. First of all, she's a visual artist and a painter who actually was invited, I should say, to be the Dutch representative for the Venice Biennial. And you know the Venice Biennial, right? It's the sort of the oldest and the most important sort of visual arts global gathering that takes place every other year in Venice, if it's not being flooded, by the way. And we have a Dutch pavilion there, and that's where her work was on show, together with Remy Jungerman, by the way. And her work is also really interesting, because I think what she does is portraying all these worlds, people that inhabit these worlds, a black diasporic transnational world where thinkers, artists, activists of color have been working and doing, and basically she is giving them space in her paintings, really beautifully done. And I think it's much more revolutionary than we give her credit for sometimes. I know Miriam Wester here in the room, I see she's been part of the conversations around her introduction into the bigger space of the arts. But yeah, so look out for her, and also let's think more deeply about what it is she's been doing. She's the typical sort of person who's not very, let's say, she's not doing, a lot of her own PR. She's not pushing herself the whole time on Instagram or being in the newspaper the whole time. She lets her thoughts come out through her art, and that's sometimes, she's a very modest person, I would say. That's also why we don't maybe see a lot of her and hear a lot of her, but you should. Okay, another accelerator, data, and we will hear more about that. The importance of empirical data. We don't have them. weirdly enough, and it's been said already, we will hear more about it later on, so I'm not going to say too much, but I think it's a huge accelerator, a huge way of pushing the conversation, because we basically don't know. We don't, and we need proof, right? We really need proof to talk about what's the actual situation that is going on here. And of course, people like the Guerrilla Girls, that's been, I think, also an source of inspiration to do your work. You'll talk about that, right? And the way they do it, so they're informing and influencing public discourse in a really important, funny, creative way also, but still, you know, at the same time pushing the boundaries. So we need also, you know, this type of push activism, informing and the public discourse, changing the narrative, if you will. And they've been hugely important in that matter. Yeah, I talked about the museum as a space that is that can be a violent space still. So I wanted to give a shout out to Simone Zeefuik, Hodan Warsame and others who have been also pushing that conversation in a different way than the Guerrilla Girls, but very effectively, I would say, pushing from the outside inward, but finding also a good ear, luckily, with the people of the TROLLA Museum, where they started a conversation about how to decolonize. And they did different things on visuals, but also on language, but also on how to set up a situation. So they've been very particular in how to then do that. And I think it's amazing that they did. And it really helps also because Stijn Schonewoert, who is the sort of, well, now the director of, it's now sort of a monopolist. All the ethnological museums are now gathered under one heading called the National Museum for World Cultures. Stijn Schonewoert is its director, and this is his quote: "Our museum was part of a racist system." Now, I think that's quite, again, revolutionary that someone in his position of power, formal power, has done it. And I would suggest that that's because also activists have done their work effectively. You know, it's kind of like a coming out in a way to say this. Having your own, most people, who doesn't know the Black Archives? Okay, well, okay, great. So they're doing really good work. 90% of you actually does know the importance of actual spaces where the narrative is changed, is pushed, but also where the canon is being transformed through literal books, but also talks and the accessibility to those books. They're not archivists. They don't know, you know, the first thing like practically how to archive, but they're learning by doing. But the more important thing is also that they, because of that collection of books that they now have, they've started a conversation. People, a lot of teachers actually come with their students weekly to visit the space and the place and the importance and the whole context around it. That is important. I'm wrapping up, yes. Isn't it great? I'm totally in time. Kudos. My schizophrenic self is doing a good job. So, yeah, sorry for the typo. But, yeah, what's the conclusion? Well, it's also not a linear process. And a lot of the stuff I said will be handled later on in the day. But sometimes we have gained more ground, and that ground has been taken away from us again. In a way. So I think that's such a key thing to take on board when we analyze these situations. It's not a linear process. It's not like it was all bad in the past and now we're going to a better future. No, some stuff was better organized, you know, earlier in the day, and we forgot about it or we threw it away. Much like architects sometimes throw away you know, really beautiful stuff, like the inner city of Utrecht that has been fucked up by architects, and now they're refurbishing that. And right, I mean, it's a good metaphor for the situation. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, we have a break, but if there's people, can we have the lights? Are there any questions or things that people are wanting to say in response? Hi.
Hi.
Say who you are. I'm holding the mic.
I'm Yin Yin. Hello. It was actually, it's a really simple question actually. I saw a word that I come by that I didn't know, but polarization?
Ah, yes, polarization. Very quickly, polarization in the Netherlands in the 1800s. The Dutch society was basically vertically organized. You stayed in your vertical lane, as it were, and basically as a pillar. And those pillars were religious or political, and not ethnic. There was not, but I think in practice we could say there are ethnic pillars in society. But we have sayings about if Catholics and Protestants would sleep together, you know, the devil would be there in the neighborhood. Like, this was the thing. If you were a Catholic, you married, if you were a Catholic girl, you married a Catholic boy, and that's what you did. And to be marrying a Protestant, that was the ultimate sin. And the same goes for political affiliation. So that's the polarization. So that's how we understand difference. Difference through religious lines and maybe political lines rather than ethnic lines, you could say. We depolarized very rapidly in the second half of the 20th century, so we did away with that. And that's also when we started to talk about allochtoon and autochtoon. And this was a term that was coined in 1971 by sociologist Hilde Verwij-Jonker to grasp this notion of the influx of others that were of color, often, of course, also. Yeah, good question, thanks. Any other questions? You want to go to your coffee break, right? But Hidde van Bak Utrecht is already here with a question.
Well, it was actually an addition to what you've told about Iris Kensmil, that tomorrow there's an opening at Museum Kranenburg at 3. So if you want to see the work yourself, you can go there tomorrow.
That's a good pitch, yes. She has an exhibit there, so it's already there, but Iris will be present. The artist is present to talk. As it so happens, I'm going to interview her. I'm sorry, yeah. You have to deal with me again if you want to go. But it really is about her. Thanks for that pitch. It really is about her work. It's in Bergen. It's a great, beautiful village anyway. So Sunday, if you think, well, you know, 11 o'clock, you get your brunch and then, well, go to Bergen. It would be really awesome. Okay, thanks for that. Last one. Eenmaal, andermaal zeggen we dan in Dutch. Okay, let's have... Oh, yes, please. No.
I was wondering, you were saying that this minister said that emancipation was finished, so there was nothing more to do. And then there are terms like diversity, and that sounds really soft if you compare that with discrimination, for instance. Is that related, you think, that emancipation, it's finished, then people are tended to use softer terms, not to really use the words discriminations, for instance.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole talk on, on language and how language constructs meaning, and meaning-making processes are influenced, and discourse is influenced by the language we use. Yes, I think that's very important. The other thing that's really important, I think, is when we talk about diversity, what do we mean? Do we mean equal ethnic or racial representation? Do we mean gender balance? What do we mean with that? But if we look at how a lot of stuff has been organized by the government, then those are very different streams. So they're never thought out in conjunction with each other. Gender issues and race issues and ability issues, sexuality issues. Well, sexuality is often combined with gender, of course, but so it's never done in an intersectional way, you could say, in policy making by the Dutch government. And this has given us huge problems, I would say, in going deeper with and a more sustainable solution, I would say, for these problems. If that makes any sense. I hope I'm not making it more difficult. Okay, let's go to break. Yay! Thank you.
Goedemorgen.